Hi, I'm Angelique, Payzar's head of content, and today I'm here with Max, our head of service delivery. Hi, Max. And we're going to be kicking off the first episode of a new addition to the Plug and Pay talk show. So it's exciting. If you have listened to Plug and Pay before, you'll know that each month we sit down and we have in-depth interviews with payroll leaders, and we get into the nitty-gritty details of big strategic topics that are affecting global payroll. But now the good news is, in addition to those monthly episodes, you'll also be able to enjoy a new episode every single week. So in these shorter bite-sized episodes, we're going to be focusing on topics that matter in the day-to-day life of a payroll professional. Max, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Angelique. Thank you. I've aged another year this week. And in the words of Dido, when she went on stage with Live Aid with Yusuf Endur playing 7 Seconds, I'm so excited.
And are you also excited to be starting these new episodes, something a little bit shorter, a little bit different?
Yes, exactly, because I've spoken to a lot of the global payroll professionals or local payroll professionals who listen to the podcast, and they said, can't you just also touch, in addition to the strategic topics, some more operational topics? That's why we decided to center this new weekly episode around the day in the life of a payroll professional, which of course I've been for the past 17 years, and most of my friends are in global payroll. So it's really exciting to start talking about those topics with you, the new host of the weekly podcast, Ange.
And I'm looking forward to picking your brains and hearing all about what it is like to be a payroll professional. So for this first episode, we're going to be talking about a poll that we carried out recently on LinkedIn. Well, actually, you carried it out. So this poll speaks to the data preparation process, which usually consumes at least 60%, if not more, of a payroll team's time. And we got some really interesting results. So if you can share with us the question, first of all, and then what is your take on the results? What did we find out?
Yes, sure. So we did that poll, as you said, did the poll on LinkedIn, got quite a number of results. I think there were, I'm looking at my paper now, 74 people who responded. So the question was, how many unique data sources flow into payroll processing? And we had 4 predefined answers: 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, and 7 plus. And I think the results just confirmed my understanding and experience of global payroll, that there's rarely a single source of truth that flows into payroll. So I think 65% responded to 5 or more data sources flowing into payroll, and only 14% responded 1 to 3 data sources into payroll. And maybe an additional context is, although there might be 5 to 7 or 7 plus data sources, it actually doesn't mean that there is just 7 data reports or data integrations flowing into payroll. Because in my experience, you could have implemented a huge HCM such as Workday or SuccessFactors, and although the lucky few might have one single integration going into payroll, most of the payroll professionals that I've spoken to still need to run a variety of reports out of those source systems to pull the data in. So typically, for instance, the core HR holds the personal data, the contractual data, the salaries. That might include some one-time bonuses. There might be people, starters, leavers. But aside from that, you need a lot more data points. For instance, you're based in Spain, Angelique, and if there's a leaver, you need additional data. You need additional forms for a payroll provider to process the data. So while you might have that one HCM, you still need additional data to be able to process payroll. And that's where the 60% or more comes from in terms of the data preparation. And then you all work towards a cutoff, and then payroll professionals in the weeds of processing payroll, who by now have completed their October payroll, so kudos to you, will need to process all of that data. And although you might have 7 data sources, it's not straight through processing, because the data that typically payroll receives is either not in the format or not in the data dictionary that they need. For instance, male, female is a required field in most of the payrolls for onboarding. But your HCM might give you male, female, but your payroll processing engine or your payroll provider might need 1 or 2. So the joys of working in payroll, Angelique.
Okay, that makes sense. And also in terms of these data sources, like, is there varying levels of complexity depending on who and where they're coming from? For example, SAP or Workday, or is it different depending on the sources?
Yeah, it is. It is different because typically an HCM works on a certain data model, and that can be significantly different across those data models. But maybe to give you a practical example, I once worked at a company that almost sounds like a Disney story. Once upon a time, I worked in a company where we received one big Excel spreadsheet because, mind you, although there are great SaaS platforms, there's still a lot of data flowing into payroll that are just pure spreadsheets. And
Okay.
maybe a plea to the payroll professionals listening to this is you can still make incremental changes while you might not be influencing the whole HCM rollout. So to this example, I received and my team received a big spreadsheet with all the commissions that needed to be paid across the globe. I think at the time it were 40 plus countries. There were, and I'm not lying, like 10 to 15 different sheets within that workbook. And then we had to find out, okay, what do we need to pay to whom? How much is it? Which currency is it in? Because it was structured in a way around business segments. So someone does business to consumer, someone does business to business, and then it was sliced into regions. And that speaks to the data model. Well, we process payroll based on a country basis. For us, it doesn't really matter in which department you work because I need to pay a commission.
Right.
So then I started having a conversation, and that's typically how an improvement starts. Just have a conversation, right? So we started having a conversation with the commission leads to speak about the data they sent to us. And then the funny thing is, they said, well, recreate this big spreadsheet because this is the way you want to receive it. So I was like, no. This is not how we want to receive it because we need to bring it back to one simple sheet with data that just says the employee number, the amount, the currency, and that's basically all that we need. And she was like flabbergasted. She said, that would make my life so much easier. I said, well, it would make my and my team's life much easier. So although the data source stays the same, we will still receive that input. The way that you can process it is much more straight through processing because we could basically just take that one file without any manipulation and upload it because we did find a lot of errors because we needed to find and slice and dice the data. While just having a conversation with the upstream partner who sends you the data can make a huge difference.
And you mentioned errors there. Do you think the more sources you have, the more likely you are to run into errors as well? Like, is that a possibility?
It certainly is, although payroll professionals never really like to talk about errors, but still there are errors, but we try to avoid making them errors. And maybe the analogy is, what if you're a cook and you have a recipe that includes 12 different ingredients? Right? The likelihood, if you're not a great cook like me, that you make a mistake, like it's 3 teaspoons of this, it's a bit of sniff of salt of this, the likelihood of making an error is higher. So the more data sources you have, the likelihood of errors, of course, is higher. But I think my plea to payroll professionals is start challenging the status quo. And this maybe comes back to the talk we did at the event in Amsterdam, which was awesome, by the way, around challenging the status quo. You don't need to always just accept the data that you receive. Right? Another example was we had a global benefit provider who also sent us data, right? And it was in a format that they said, yeah, we just think that this is how you need it. So again, just starting a conversation with whatever partner, and in this particular case, I had to connect with my team to our benefit team to say, hey, you have a relationship with this benefit provider who at the time was a global benefit provider. Can't we just have a conversation about the data that we receive and the time frame we receive it in? Because the payrolls are run based on payroll calendars, right? Strict cutoffs. We need to make sure all the data is in before we can process it, and all has sequential steps. And you don't want everything out of those data sources to come at the same time. But imagine it's payroll cutoff, for instance, the 10th of the month. You have 7 different data sources, but those 7 different data sources actually mean you have 25 different inputs. because you might receive different inputs from a data source.
Each one, yeah.
If you receive it all at once, and then typically the time to process it might be 1 or 2 days before you need to submit it. And then you multiply it by 40 countries. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't tell this story to my children, by the way, because otherwise they will never start in payroll. So if you can just have a conversation and look at the data, and this was on a particular example with the global benefit, which was they actually had a cutoff for submitting benefits the last day of the prior month, which means that they could send the data much earlier than the 10th of the month. So I said to them, how many days do you need to process the data? They said, well, like 5 days. I said, what do you then do the other 5 days? Yeah, we just sit on the data because you need it by the 10th. So not only have we improved the quality of the data we get it, we also get it earlier to front load a bit of the workload. So the plea is challenge the status quo, my dear payroll professionals, and just talk to your upstream partners. While you might not overhaul the complete infrastructure, you can make little incremental changes to make the day in the life of a payroll professional just a little bit better.
A little bit smoother.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. So maybe some of the resistance isn't necessarily resistance, it's just that's how the processes have been going, and they could be challenged, perhaps.
Well, I encourage everyone to always challenge everything, but that's maybe a little bit in my DNA, in my cultural background. But whatever you challenge, do it with an open mind, right? Have the upstream partners understand the need of why you're requesting a change. Don't just send an email saying, hey, I need this in this format. Then they'll say, well, you just suck it up and just process what we deliver. So make them part of that journey. And that maybe speaks to some of the webinars we're doing, which of course I encourage everyone to join, around, just explain how the data flows into payroll, explain the effect, what it has on receiving bad data or untimely data, and have a conversation around them, and make sure that they understand the need for change.
Exactly. So talking of the need for change and change in general, obviously you've been working in payroll for 17 years now, if I remember correctly. And I'm curious how this process has changed over time. So we can see there that like 43% of people said 7+. I wonder exactly how many that is. But have you found that like over the years there's been more sources now that we have different technologies, Workday, HiBob, these type of things? Have you seen it changing over time? Is it more complex now?
It's an interesting question. So that makes me reflect of all the jobs I think no, actually not. Which is strange, right? With all the technological developments, and there was always this cycle fear of payroll professionals. Whenever there's new technology or automation or digitization, we might lose our jobs. It doesn't happen, right?
People always get paid.
Yeah, and my first job actually was typing in timesheets, just physical timesheets that people at the time at the dredging ships or oil and gas rigs physically, like with pen and paper, wrote down, I have worked so many hours, then the captain needed to sign it. It was sent via normal post to us. Then I needed to type those in, but then there were additional sources as well. So although like time cards, everything is digitized, it's still a data point you need to process. So while I don't need to type in timesheets anymore, I still need to process time and attendance. And there's still no single source holy grail that captures all the data points that we need. And I think a part of it is legislation, right? There's still a lot of legislation that demands certain data structures or data elements. An example I gave in a webinar I did recently for the Canadian Payroll Association is there's 131 unique data points in just the Dutch payroll that you need to submit in the payroll tax return every cycle for every individual employee. And I once did an exercise to link sources to those 140 plus data points. You end up with, like the result, 7+ sources. So it's just complex, but I would always say it's wonderfully complex because that makes payroll the best profession, Angelique, in the world.
Not biased or anything.
No, I'm totally.
And I guess then my next question would be, so what would have made that easier? What type of tool, what type of differences to the processes would have made your life easier in those type of situations?
I guess if I would have this glass ball I would love to have a system that takes any data from any source in any data format and transforms it automatically in something that payroll can process. So therefore, you become truly source agnostic.
Agnostic, exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you feel like that would also improve the process, like working alongside HR? Because I assume a lot of the data is coming from HR. Do you think that could also improve the interdepartmental communication?
Well, I think it would kind of take the stress out of working with HR or any other partners in terms of the data they need to send by which time and which date, because that's always the conversation. And actually, I had to connect with one of my prior colleagues because it's payroll calendar time. Because in October, November, you start discussing your payroll calendars for the next year. Like, what are the cutoffs? What are the service level processing times with your payroll vendors? And then you start a discussion with your HR partners, like, okay, what's going to be the calendar for next year? When do we need your data? And if you could give them 1 or 2 days extra, they will frantically love you. And I think,
yeah, I'll be very happy.
Exactly. And also it has your own benefits, right? Because you'll be able to have better quality data, no changes after cutoff. And that's like the art of the payroll calendar that payroll professionals do. Okay, how are we going to manage the day? Because finance at the end needs the payroll results in a GL for month close, quarterly close, year-end close. We have a payroll processing SLA of 3 to 5 days with the payroll vendor, or when you're doing it in-house. Therefore, we need, probably depending on the quality of your data, you need 2 or 3 days after cutoff to process payroll. Therefore, the cutoff is this. And then you go to all the partners, hey, we propose this cutoff. And then the whole almost consensual discussion starts with your upstream partners.
Okay. So, well, I think that's a good place to leave it for today's episode. So thanks to everyone who's joined us, and we will be back next week. We'll be releasing every single week now. So we hope you'll tune in again next Friday on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you did enjoy this episode, make sure to subscribe and also leave us a review. And as Max mentioned earlier, we're also running webinars every month as well. So if you follow us on LinkedIn, you can find out about when those are and what they're about. And anything else to add about that, Max?
No, of course, encourage everyone to listen and subscribe. Podcast is my favorite travel companion when I need to go anywhere. And speaking of LinkedIn, so if you want any topic to be discussed in this new episode, let me know on LinkedIn. And Angelique and I will make sure we discuss the topic, and perhaps you can even feature on one of the podcasts. So I guess this is until next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.